Let me tell you something strange about people who don't watch football. Not just the ones who missed a match or two, I mean the ones who never got into it. The ones who stay quiet when everyone else is screaming at a screen. The ones who scroll past the score updates like they're reading weather reports from another planet. In a world where stadiums feel like modern cathedrals, that silence stands out. You know the type. Someone says, "Did you see the game last night?" And they just smile, shake their head, maybe mumble, "Nah, not really into it." And suddenly the room shifts. It's almost like they broke an unspoken rule, like they just admitted they don't breathe air. Because football isn't just a sport anymore. It's a language, a rhythm the world moves to. It fills pubs, streets, living rooms. It shapes identity, loyalty, even politics. And yet, some people simply don't tune in. Here's what's interesting. When someone doesn't watch football, people rarely let it slide. They ask, why not? Like it needs justification. Like disinterest is an act of rebellion. And maybe it is. Because football, for billions, is more than 90 minutes. It's belonging. It's ritual. It's the collective heartbeat of a tribe. So when someone stands outside of that, they're not just skipping a game. They're stepping outside the tribe. But here's the thing nobody says out loud. Sometimes those who don't watch, they're not disconnected. They're observant. They see how passion turns to noise, how rivalry turns to rage, how identity becomes borrowed from colors on a shirt. And somewhere deep down, they realize maybe they don't need that. It's not that they hate football, it's that they see the way people lose themselves inside it, and they quietly wonder what's left outside of it. Maybe they prefer silence to chance. Maybe they find meaning in different places, in books, in music, in stillness. Or maybe they just never felt the pull. And yet, that quiet indifference says something powerful about human nature. Because when the whole world screams in one direction, it takes a certain kind of mind to stay still. That's what this is really about. Not the game itself, but what it means to not play along. To stand on the edge of collective excitement and feel nothing but calm. You see, when someone doesn't watch football, it's rarely just about the game. It's about rhythm, about choosing a different frequency when the world drums in unison. Psychologists talk about something called social synchrony, the way humans align emotionally and behaviorally with the group. It's ancient, survival-based. Tribes used to hunt together, dance together, grieve together. Now, we watch together. Sports are just the modern ritual. So when someone opts out, when they quietly step away from that massive emotional orchestra, people notice. They assume it's arrogance or apathy, but more often it's neither. It's self-preservation. Because some minds just can't fake excitement on cue. They don't feel what the crowd feels, not out of superiority, but out of difference. They're wired for observation instead of immersion. While others chant, they analyze. While others celebrate, they ask, why does this matter so much? And that question, that small, quiet rebellion, often reveals a deeper kind of consciousness. It's not that they don't care about belonging, everyone does, but they're not willing to trade self for it. See, football fandom isn't just entertainment, it's identity architecture. It gives people colors to wear, enemies to hate, heroes to worship. It fills that deep human hunger for belonging. But for some, that kind of belonging feels synthetic, too easy, too loud. So they choose distance, not because they lack emotion, but because they crave authentic emotion. Not mass-produced, not collective, but real, quiet, internal. And in that silence, something interesting happens. They start noticing what others miss. They see how emotion spreads like fire, how unity turns to frenzy, how joy turns to chaos the moment a ball crosses a line. They see beauty and madness in the same breath and decide not to be consumed by either. For them, life's meaning isn't found in a score or a final whistle. It's in the quiet after the noise. There's a phrase I once heard, not every symphony needs a listener. Maybe that's what these people understand. They don't need to join the song to feel alive. They're content watching the orchestra from afar, hearing every instrument, every emotion, without losing themselves in it. And in a world addicted to belonging, that's not detachment. That's control. They remind us that individuality doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just observes. There's something liberating about not needing to care. Not in a cold way, but in a grounded, self-contained way. When you stop needing the crowd's rhythm, something shifts inside you. You stop measuring excitement by how loud everyone else is. You stop borrowing meaning from the scoreboard. You start realizing that joy doesn't have to be synchronized. See, when people gather around football, they experience collective emotion, dopamine in stereo. Victory feels sweeter because it's shared. Loss feels lighter because it's distributed. It's intoxicating. But that same current can pull you under. It can blur where your feelings end and the groups begin. And for some people, that blur feels dangerous. They crave emotional clarity, the ability to feel things that are theirs, not inherited from the mass around them. That's what emotional independence really looks like. Not detachment from feeling, but ownership of it. And those who don't watch football, they often live there, in that space where feeling isn't dictated by a whistle or a screen. They find meaning elsewhere, in smaller, quieter victories, like finishing a book that shook them, or sitting in silence long enough to understand something they've been avoiding. They find adrenaline not from goals, but from growth. And while the crowd celebrates one man's shot into a net, they're out walking somewhere, not out of protest, just peace. They don't need the noise to feel alive. It's not that they think they're above it, it's that they've realized life offers 1,000 ways to feel something real, and only a few of them are televised. But there's also loneliness in that independence, because when you stop syncing with the collective pulse, you start noticing how rare stillness is, how uncomfortable people get when you don't mirror their excitement. They'll say, "You should watch the final, man." Everyone's watching, and you'll just smile, because you've seen this movie before. The need to belong is ancient, but the courage to stand apart, that's evolution. And that's what makes these people quietly fascinating. They're not emotionless, they're selective. They choose what gets to move them. They decide which stories deserve their energy. They don't clap just because everyone else is clapping. In a world built on hype, that restraint is radical. It's the art of feeling deeply without being swept away. You know what's strange? In a world this loud, disinterest has become a form of wisdom. We live in a culture that glorifies obsession. Pick a team, pick a side, pick a passion, and scream it until your throat gives out. That's what belonging looks like now. Intensity equals meaning. But what if it doesn't? What if the ones who don't care about football aren't missing something? What if they're seeing something the rest of us can't? Maybe they've noticed how easily passion turns into identity, how something innocent, a game, becomes a battleground for ego, politics, nationalism, even hate. Maybe they've seen too many people lose themselves in tribal colors, fighting strangers over symbols they don't actually control, and somewhere deep down they decided not to join the noise. Not because they're detached, but because they value what's real. There's a kind of spiritual clarity in not needing the spectacle. When you stop feeding off collective emotion, you begin to taste silence again. You start seeing how overstimulated the world has become, every minute filled with reaction, opinion, argument. And when you don't plug into that, it feels weird at first, then peaceful, then addictive, but in a different way. See, disinterest isn't emptiness, it's attention redirected. It's the mind saying, "I'd rather observe than perform." And that's rare now, because we live in an attention economy. Everything, from sports to politics, is fighting for your gaze, your outrage, your loyalty. But those who don't watch, don't cheer, don't click, they take back control of that gaze. They become the watcher instead of the watched, and watchers see everything. They notice how joy turns into dependence, how distraction masquerades as meaning, how tribal unity feels warm but slowly erodes individuality. They see how entertainment disguises emptiness, how we chase highs not to feel alive, but to avoid feeling nothing. And maybe that's the quiet realization behind their disinterest. That real life, real connection, real wonder doesn't need an audience or a scoreboard. They're not against passion, they're against noise. They're not cold, they're awake. And when you're awake, you start asking harder questions, like, why do we need to gather around distraction just to feel close to each other? Why do we need a shared obsession to validate our bonds? Why can't stillness be enough? That's where the philosophy of disinterest begins. Not in apathy, but awareness. The kind that doesn't shout, it just sees. Maybe that's what this all comes down to. Not apathy, not rebellion, just awareness. Because when you stop watching football, or anything that captures the world's collective obsession, you start seeing how deeply people need noise to feel alive. How uncomfortable silence has become. How rare it is to meet someone who doesn't fill every quiet moment with distraction. And maybe the people who don't watch, they're just not playing that game anymore. They don't need 90 minutes of emotional outsourcing. They don't need someone else's victory to feel like their own. They don't need to belong to the crowd to feel human. They've found something steadier, something that doesn't fluctuate with a scoreline or depend on a referee's call, a peace that isn't loud, but lasts. And you can feel it in the way they move through the world. They don't rush to join the conversation about the latest match. They don't fake excitement just to fit in. They listen more, they observe more, they think before reacting. And when they do speak, it's not to prove they know the score, it's to ask something real. And you can tell they've built their identity in places the crowd can't reach. That's the quiet kind of freedom most people overlook. The freedom to not participate, to not perform enthusiasm on cue, to not need to explain your stillness. And yet, there's a strange irony here. The same people who don't watch are often the ones who understand it most. They can see the art, the psychology, the tribal beauty of it all, without needing to be consumed by it. They can appreciate it without worshipping it, like someone admiring a storm from the window instead of stepping into the rain. Because that's what detachment really is, not indifference, but distance with understanding. And in a world addicted to engagement, that's radical. Maybe they've learned that not every emotion needs a crowd, not every passion needs to be shared, and not every moment of joy needs to come with a soundtrack of cheers. Sometimes meaning is quiet. Sometimes connection doesn't look like unity, it looks like peace. So the next time someone says, "You don't watch football?" maybe the real answer isn't no. Maybe it's, "I'm watching something else. Life, unscored, untelevised, and beautifully, peacefully, their own."